Undeleted Memories by a Mad Painter, a.k.a. T.R. Becker.
"How can you make a statement like that with no proof?" yelled one of the reporters, and another one yelled, "How can you expect us to believe you?" The room was so noisy with questions that his head began to spin. The old doctor saw what it was doing and held up his hands, yelling, "Out! Out, I say! He needs rest!" A moment later, only the doctor and one of the FBI agents, who was sitting quietly in the corner, was left with him in the room. He laid back, closed his eyes. He now wished he could remember what had happened to him. Only the doctor and two nurses were there when he was found and brought to the hospital. He had no memory of being found, or by who. He had no idea what he could have told the ones who had found him. He had been burning up with fever. The doctor had said it was over 107, and he should be dead. He had told him it was because of the radiation, a type they had never seen before. That was why the FBI agent was there. His head settled down some, so he opened his eyes again. The doctor was adding something to his IV. A painkiller, he hoped. The agent was just sitting there watching him. Right before he passed out, he heard the agent say, "He will be out for," and he was out. He became aroused one time and could tell he was moving and heard, "He's coming around," from one voice, and then another, "Not for long," and he was out again. The drug-induced sleep was dreamless. He had no idea how long he was out, but when he woke, he was in a semi-dark room and was strapped down to the bed. His stomach felt funny, and he thought it was because it was empty. He could not remember when he had ate last. What he really wanted was a hit on his pipe, but they had taken that along with his clothes when he had been admitted into the hospital. He wondered where he was and why they had moved him. Was it to get him away from the reporters, or so he wasn't able to talk with them? Hell, he really was not sure what had happened to him. His mind felt like it had been taken out, put in a blender on high speed, and dumped back in. The door opened, and in walked a nurse. She was smiling at him. "Awake, I see," she said as she walked over to the bed. She was a fine-looking woman, he thought. "I was told that if you promised to behave, I could unstrap you. How about it? Promise?" He shook his head and smiled up at her. "Sure. Can I use a head, or do I have to use a bedpan?" he asked. As she unhooked the straps, she said, "Head over there." She nodded her head at a door in the corner. "And if you want to get a shower, I can remove the IV." He rubbed his wrist, sat up on the edge of the bed. Where am I, and why am I here? He felt weak and was not sure he could take a shower. "I don't have the clearance to tell you that. You'll have to speak with a doctor." She opened the drawer on the little nightstand, took out a pair of slippers. "Hospital policy, you understand." She never stopped smiling. He took them and put them on his feet. "I guess I should get a shower." "Okay, you have about 30 minutes before lunch. I'll make sure you have towels." She went to look. "You're all set. Let's get that IV out." A moment later, he was walking slowly to the shower. He stood under the hot water longer than normal would have, it feeling so good to him. There was a knock on the door, and the nurse's voice told him that lunch was in 5 minutes. He hurried as best he could, and when he opened the door, a young man was entering the room carrying a tray. He smiled and said, "Chair or the bed?" he asked. He took the chair. He had been in bed long enough. He ate everything on the tray. He had been hungry. He had not noticed until now there was a window in one wall. It had a heavy curtain drawn across it. He had thought about going over to look out, but he was feeling a little tired. As he got to his feet, the nurse came in. She looked at the empty tray. I never thought food was all that good myself. She helped him to the bed. Oh, by the way, my name is Susie Planner. Dull name, I know. Just call me Susie. She was anything but dull, he thought. When will I see the doctor? He asked. He had a lot of questions. He will be in later today, Mr. Johnson. Just relax for now. She went out the door. He laid there thinking about what had happened. They had told him that he had some kind of radiation poisoning, but he felt fine. It was his mind that was a mess, not his body, other than feeling a little weak. The images that he had didn't make any sense. They were blurred like a bad TV picture. Colors were off, and the sound, he remembered, were so slowed down he was unable to understand it. Could the radiation have done that to him, he wondered? The doctor had said they had never seen that type before. He was not an educated man, but he had read a lot about radiation poisoning and knew it was bad to have. Nurse Sally had acted as if he was not contagious or that he would be spreading contamination of any kind. There was nothing to read in the room, nor was there a TV, so he took a nap. His dreams were even more of a mess than his waking thoughts. There were giant hands reaching out for him out of multicolored fog. Laughter echoed in his mind from different directions. It made his head spin, and the fear was almost overwhelming. He jerked awake and was shocked to see the FBI agent was sitting there. Mr. Johnson, my name is Agent Rowe. I have a few questions that I would like to go over with you if you are up to it. He held up his ID card. He nodded his head, still trying to clear the dream out. I'm not sure what I can help you with. Do you remember anything that you said when you first were found? No, I don't have a clue. Is that why there was all the reporters? Yes, it was, and why you were brought here, for your own safety. His own safety, he wondered? Why should he be worried about anyone wanting to hurt him? Why was I knocked out? For the first time, he's seen a slight smile. We faked your death. What, he thought? Just what the hell was going on here? What gives you the right to do something like that? His voice was a little loud. Why, the president and a little thing called national security does. And like I said, it was for your own safety. How could that be for my own good? If you hadn't noticed, that group of reporters were not being too friendly to you. And there is a group calling themselves the Intel Keepers who have made a public threat. He had heard of them and knew that their threats were real. But why would they make a threat to kill him? Just what had he done or said? He had a bewildered look on his face as he asked, What did I say to make the Intel Keepers so mad at me that they would want me dead? That, my good man, is why we brought you here, to get you to remember what you did. The way he said it made him feel like he was now a criminal. He had always followed the law. Not even once had he jaywalked on his way to work. He was a simple man, but he was no criminal. Even a ticket for that would have cost him more than he could afford with what he made as a low-level tracer. Being a tracer, he had a lot of information on people in the area. Low-level meant just that. The information he could see were things like internet expenses, what was ordered at the food stores, and the likes. He began to feel worse again, and Agent Rowe could see in his face. So he said, you will see the doctor soon. Please give him your cooperation if you'd like this to come to an end. He stood up, went to the door, stopped, looked at him, and added, You must remember what happened to you, or we will never be allowed to let you go. Out the door he went. Wow, he thought, not allowed to leave? He would become a prisoner because of a national security violation over something that he couldn't remember. He laid back and closed his eyes. His mind spun every time he tried to think about what happened to him. All he could remember of that day was waking up in the hospital with the reporters yelling at him. He was going to have to remember whatever it was. There was no way he wanted to stay here. He fell into sleep that was anything but restful. He seen the hands reach for him, but this time he noticed they were not human hands, but metal ones. He had only seen a couple of androids before. With his job, they were not needed for any work. There were nothing dangerous about being a low-level tracer. Androids cost too much to be used for clerical work. Of course, there were robots all over the place, but they were limited to what they could do, unlike an android. For all he knew, Nurse Sally could be one, but he didn't think so. He woke when Nurse Sally entered the room pushing a small cart of medical equipment, smiling as she always did. "Doctor will be in soon to see you," she said as a young man entered pushing a rolling stool, nodded to her, and out he went. "Sit up on the edge of your bed, please." He did as asked. She picked up a blood pressure wrap from the cart, put it on his arm. As she finished up, the door opened, and in walked the doctor and Agent Rowe. The doctor was a good 65 or more, with white hair that could have been a brown at one time. He carried a clipboard in one hand and a pen in the other. He sat down on the rolling stool while Agent Rowe moved to the other side of the bed behind Jim. "Mr. Johnson, I am Dr. Sheckley. I've been asked to see if I could help you remember what happened to you." "I was told I had some kind of radiation poisoning." He looked up at Rowe and then said, "I assure you, you don't." Agent Rowe spoke up. "It was part of the disinformation we put out to help keep you safe." "Jim, may I call you Jim?" Sheckley asked. He nodded his head. "The only physical effects that you have had are dehydration and fatigue. I am not here as a medical doctor. I'm a psychiatrist." He let that sink in a moment. "Okay, first, I would like you to tell me what you remember of the morning before you woke in the hospital." For the next hour and a half, they talked about what he could remember. The morning was normal, shower and breakfast, his walk to work. It was when he went to lunch that his memory failed. He began to get a little headache, so the doctor told the nurse to get him a tranquilizer with dinner, which was about to be served. He thanked him as Agent Rowe and him left the room. He laid back, not sure he even wanted dinner. He wondered if the doctor had gotten anything out about what he said. He thought it strange that Agent Rowe had not said anything the whole time. When dinner came, Nurse Sally gave him the tranquilizer. He took it and ate most of the meatloaf and mashed taters. When Sally returned to get the tray, he asked, "No television?" She smiled and said, "No cable." A hospital without cable, he thought? That was bull. Why didn't they want him to watch TV? "I can turn on the intercom. There's some light music playing," she offered. He told her sure, and he was surprised it was only 20-year-old tunes, nothing newer. The tranquilizer was working and his headache was easing off. He was going to get bored fast. No TV, no books, no computer. He wondered if he could get a deck of cards. Nurse Sally came back with a razor and shaving cream. He asked about the cards, and she said she would see while he was showering and shaving. When he came back out, she was sitting there, smiling, holding a deck of cards. "Rummy or gin?" she asked. "Aren't you working?" he questioned. "Yes, but you're my only patient, and believe me, I know how boring this place can be." The next day, Agent Rowe had brought him some real clothes. This made him feel better. He hated the hospital gowns. This helped to make him feel a little more normal than what he had been feeling. Agent Rowe had told him that the next day he would be taken to Sheckley's lab. The doctor believes that he has a way to help you remember. That would be great as far as he was concerned. He didn't want to be stuck here any longer than he had to be. But where was he to go? He was declared dead after all. No one has told me where we're at. Can you? He asked the agent. He shook his head. Not yet, I can't. But if what the doctor has in mind works, this will all end tomorrow, and we will both have the answers we want. He was still not sure what answers the agent wanted, but he wanted the holes in his mind filled. The next day he was ready when Nurse Sally came to him with a wheelchair. Smiling, she said, "Your ride has arrived, sir." He sat down, kind of feeling guilty. After all, he could walk. She pushed him out the door into the hall. It was long with many doors on each side. All of them were closed, so he had no idea what was in them. They could have been rooms just like his, but he had the feeling they were not. It felt eerie to him not to hear or see anyone else. This place didn't have the feel of a hospital, more like an abandoned sanitarium. At the end of the hall, she backed him into an elevator, pushed the B14 button. They were on B1 level. It took longer than he thought it should have to reach B14. The door opened on a huge room. It was full of all kinds of scientific equipment. Some of it he knew about, but most he had no clue of what it was. There were little lights everywhere blinking on and off, and strange clicking and whirling motor sounds. This is what one would have thought of as a mad scientist's lab in a cheap movie. Sheckley and Agent Rowe were there waiting on them. Sheckley was standing next to a chair that looked like it was from some kind of carnival ride. Agent Rowe was sitting on a stool not far off. "Thought you said you were a psychiatrist," Jim said. This made Sheckley smile. "Well, yes. That is just one of my 6 doctrines. Can you please change seats?" He had an uneasy feeling as he stood up and sat back down in the funny-looking seat. Nurse Sally slipped some kind of wired net over his head, with wires that led to a few of the boxes that had blinking lights on them. Sheckley put a wrap around his arm and a heartbeat sensor on his fingers. After 5 minutes, he felt like he really was in a cheap monster movie from the ancient past. What kind of information could he have that they would go through all this to get him to remember what had happened to him? None of any of this was making any sense to him. He was a nobody in the world, just a low-level tracer, without much of a life, and now no life at all, being declared dead. Would they really let him go if he gave them what they wanted? Nurse Sally took off his right shoe and sock and put a sensor on his big toe. Smiling as always, said, "Eeny, meeny, miny, mo." He was not amused, but he tried to smile. He was about to find out what had happened to him, or he hoped so. She held up a cup of water with a straw. He took a sip. Sheckley was smiling. "Have you ever partaked in any of the commercial hallucinogenic drugs that are available in one of the common plazas?" He was shocked that he asked. "Of course not," he said, looking over at Agent Rowe sitting there silent. What did the doctor take him for? One of them antisocial intel keepers? Don't take any offense, young man. It's if you had, then your mind would be prepared for what you are about to go through. As the doctor talked, Sally rolled up the arm of his shirt. He had hardly noticed as the IV needle went in, till he felt the cold drip begin to enter his blood. Lean back and relax. We will begin in a few minutes. He walked over to Agent Rowe and whispered something. The agent nodded his head. He went to a table and picked up a set of virtual reality goggles. He plugged them into Jim's chair and said, "We will be monitoring everything that your mind sees on that monitor over there." He pointed to the table. "This is a cross between past regression and hypnosis. Have no fear. None of what you will see or hear will be happening now. It will only be your memories, nothing more." He handed the goggles to Nurse Sally, who put them on him, saying, "Just relax and pretend that you're having a dream." He could handle a dream. That was no big deal. Now a nightmare, that was different. "You will feel a little sick as the drugs begin to work, but it'll pass." He was smiling, but Jim could not see him. He pushed the button on the back of a chair. "Okay, here we go." The screen in the goggles began to glow. He felt the cold flow of drugs into his arm. A moment later he heard Sheckley in a low voice, "I want you to think about that morning, but don't force it. Just let it flow." On the goggles, the scene changed to his face looking into the bathroom mirror. But to his mind, he was standing there. His mind knew that it wasn't real, but at the same time it was. He was a passenger, yet it was him. He wondered if this was what it was like to have schizophrenia or split personality, whichever it was. He shaved his face, and when he cut his jaw, he felt it just like he had on that morning. This surprised him a little. He had never thought that memories of pain could be so real. When one remembers a burn, the pain don't return each time. He remembered that Shackley had said they could see what he was seeing. This device could solve many crimes that took months or years in the courts. He wondered if this was why Agent Rowe was there, to see this device in use. He tasted his breakfast, having forgot how good it had tasted that morning. He was halfway to work when it became light out. He liked that time in his walk. There were few on the streets before then. By the time he reached work, the streets were full, people rushing to work, bumping into each other, with little care other than their own needs. He had felt this is not a healthy way for people to live so crowded. He wondered if they could feel what he was feeling, then decided they couldn't. They were just watching the monitor. This was good, he thought. His feelings should be his own. The morning at work was normal. He checked on where his group of people had gone the night before. No one had went anywhere they should not have. Each had their wristbands, that was their phone, bank, and class ID, so would never go anywhere without them. Each class had restrictions on movement. He was not sure why, nor had he ever questioned it. It was just the way it was. It was just before lunchtime that his memories had failed him. He was now reliving that time, but yet living it for the first time. So far he had enjoyed the experience and wondered if the others watching thought how dull his life really was. He stood up from his desk, wanting tacos for lunch that day. He felt his mouth water with the thought. There was a street stand across from the central part that he liked. He decided to go there for lunch. He checked to make sure there was no rain scheduled before heading out to lunch. The street was full of people and robots going about their daily tasks. He felt like a small fish in an ocean of sharks. The taco stand was next to a small alleyway between buildings. In the alleyway were a few young boys not paying any attention to the busy street a few feet away, nor was anyone on the street paying any attention to them. He stood there lost in how good the taste of the tacos were, when suddenly a clumsy robot ran into his shoulder, spinning him around into one of the young men in the alleyway. His taco went all over the young man's shirt as he was pushed down onto the ground. Wow, he thought. It had hurt, but why had he not remembered it? He felt a flash of embarrassment. He rushed to help the young man up, but the others stopped him. "Hold on there, old man," one of them said, and another said, "How rude." They each grabbed an arm and held him still, as the one who was knocked down stood up and turned to look at him. As he tried to brush the tacos off his shirt, he walked over to him, checked his wristband. Jimmy Joe Johnson, low-level tracker. He looked him over. "I think Jimmy here has solved our problem for us." Suddenly the young man punched him in the stomach. Then he felt a prick in his neck, and everything went black. This shocked him at first. Then he thought they must have drugged him at that point. He was awake and asleep at the same time. Even stranger was the fact that he could hear some of what was being said by the young men. There was no coherent sentences, but there were words like prisoner, credit, message, and even intel keeper. What happened next will forever be burned into his mind. He was laying face down with his eyes closed, but he could still tell that he was in bright light. Not wanting to let his captors know that he was conscious, he lay as still as he could. The air moved around and he smelled something he had never smelled before. It was almost sweet, but it reminded him of some of the perfume that women wore at work. He slowly opened one eye, looking down at where he laid. It was metal. He opened the other eye, and then he rolled his head just a little to the side. He was shocked by what he seen. Not 10 feet away from him was some kind of green plant life. It was growing right out of the ground. He closed his eyes, not sure he was seeing it or hallucinating from the drugs he was given. After a few moments, he rolled onto his back. One side of his face became warmer than the other. The light was brighter on that side, he thought. He was not sure how long he laid there with his eyes closed. When he decided to open them, they watered from the bright light. At first he had no clue what he was seeing. Then, as if being struck by lightning, it hit him. It was the sky he was seeing. He was outside in the open. Blackness overtook his mind in his memories and in real time. When he woke, his mind was still a mess from the shock and the drugs. The first thing he seen was the smiling face of Nurse Sally, and the second was a safely placed ceiling. "You had us worried for the last couple of days," she said. His throat was dry, but he asked, "Days?" "Yes, you've been out for 2 days, and I'll say, what you have been through, I'm not sure I could handle it. Who would have thought someone could go outside and live to talk about it? You were lucky the maintenance android had found you." The door opened. Sheckley and Agent Rowe entered. "Well, now that you've had your memories back, there's no reason for you to be here." He kind of giggled. "Where can a dead man go?" Agent Rose spoke up. "You seem to have a little problem. Well, I do too. The intel keepers are still out there, and now they know that people can live on the outside." As far as he knew, he was the only human who had gone outside in 1,000 years. After the Great War, the surface and most of the life had been destroyed, making mankind move underground. People had forgotten how life was open and free before then. The government has known this for some time, but most would no way deal with it as well as you have. Dr. Sheckley is working on this now. He believes to have the problem taken care of soon, thanks to your help. As I said before, the intel keepers are still out there and need to be stopped. I could use a partner. What do you say?